They said the house still stands, beneath the slow rot of pine and time, under the weight of 100 southern summers, it waits. A home once filled with the laughter of children, now hollowed out, its windows staring like open wounds across the red dirt of Alabama. If you listen long enough, you might still hear the creak of a rocking chair on the porch, and the whisper of a name that was never supposed to be spoken again. Her name was Clara Mee, 16 years old, bright as spring, soft as cotton. Her father called her his angel, though what he meant by that would come to haunt generations. The story of the man who made his daughter his bride was not written in any newspaper, nor confessed in any court. It was whispered behind closed doors, traded like a curse in hushed tones at church gatherings, and eventually buried, because it was easier that way. But the past doesn't stay buried. It seeps through cracks in memory, rises in the soil, and stains everything that grows above it. In 1908, a man named Samuel Harlan ruled his family like a kingdom, a patriarch in the truest, most dangerous sense. To the townspeople of Pike County, he was a man of God, a provider, a respected landowner. To his children, he was the law itself. His word carried the weight of Scripture, and disobedience was sin. What happened inside that house was spoken of only once, and only by those who couldn't bear the silence any more. It began after his wife, Clara's mother, fell ill, typhoid they said, but there were rumors that Samuel had refused the doctor, believing prayer alone would heal her. When she died, something inside him fractured. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was something darker that grief simply gave permission to crawl out. 3 months later, he told the town that God had given him a new vision, that a man could take what was his own to preserve the purity of his bloodline. They called it madness then, but he called it divine order, and before anyone could stop him, the church bells rang, not for a funeral, but for a wedding, the groom, Samuel Harlan, the bride, his daughter. The townspeople came in their Sunday clothes, their faces stiff with confusion. Some said they came because they didn't believe the rumors. Others said they came because they wanted to see evil up close, to see if it had a face, if it could be recognized. The chapel smelled of cedar and wax, and the summer heat pressed in heavy through the open windows. Clara Mee stood at the front in a white dress sewn by her own trembling hands. Her hair was braided, her eyes wide, her lips colorless. No one remembers the exact words Samuel spoke that day, only that his voice was calm, that he read from the Bible as if it were proof, as if Scripture itself bent to his will. A man shall cleave to his own flesh, he said, and they shall be one. The preacher refused to perform the ceremony, so Samuel did it himself. He placed the ring on her finger while the room watched in silence. Someone's child began to cry. Outside, a dog barked once, sharp and lonely, and then the bell tolled again, sealing it all. The law never came. The sheriff was his cousin. The preacher left town within the week, and the people who'd witnessed the ceremony never spoke of it again. Not in letters, not in whispers. The Harlan family's land was too large, their influence too deep. Samuel was not just a man. He was the spine of the county's wealth, the kind of power that turned morality into suggestion. In the months that followed, the house became quieter. The curtains stayed drawn, and the farmhands said they were told never to speak to Clara again. She was seen only once, in the fall of that year, walking the edge of the field barefoot, her dress stained red from the clay. They said she looked at peace, but not the kind of peace that comes from God, the kind that comes when the body decides it's done fighting. A year later, a boy was born. The ledger in the county records lists him only as Harlan, infant male. No mother's name, no note of birth, just a line of ink, faded and alone, and that's where the story should have ended. But evil never stops at one generation. It teaches, it grows roots, and it learns to hide in plain sight. They said the boy grew up with his father's eyes, pale, distant, a color that didn't quite belong to this world. His name was Thomas, though few ever called him that. To most he was just the Harlan boy, a whisper more than a person. The townsfolk watched him from a distance, unsure of what he was innocent or accursed. Children weren't allowed to play near the Harlan property. Mothers pulled them close when the boy walked past the churchyard. Even the dogs avoided him. There was something in the way he moved, slow, deliberate, like he was waiting for something no one else could see. Clara Mee never left the house. Her father, her husband, kept her hidden. She took ill often, though whether it was sickness of the body or soul, no one could say. The midwife who helped with the birth told a neighbor she had never seen a woman look so frightened to be alive. By the time Thomas turned 7, Clara Mee had vanished completely. Samuel told the town she'd gone to visit family in Georgia, but the letters stopped coming, the years passed, and the people learned, as they always do, to forget what makes them uncomfortable. Samuel prospered. The farm grew. The rail line expanded near his land, and with it his wealth. But inside that house something was unraveling. The housekeeper, an old woman named Ruth, told her niece in a letter that strange noises came from the root cellar at night. Heavy footsteps, the sound of chains. Once, she said, she saw Samuel standing in the hallway with a candle, staring at a closed door for hours. When she tried to leave her job, he paid her double to stay. When she finally quit, she left behind every belonging she owned. By 1919, Samuel Harlan was found dead at his dining table. Heart failure, they said. No autopsy. The doctor signed the certificate and closed the case. But Ruth's niece, the one who'd heard all those stories, claimed that when they laid his body out, there were marks on his chest, not wounds, but symbols, scratched deep into his skin, as if carved by his own hand. And under the house, when they finally cleared the cellar, they found 3 graves, unmarked, one small enough for a child. No one spoke of it again. The land was sold, the house abandoned. But stories like that don't die. They just wait for someone to start asking questions. Decades passed. The world moved on. The Great War came and went, and the Harlan land changed hands again and again. By the 1950s, the story had become little more than a ghost tale, told by teenagers around campfires near the old foundation. They said you could see a light flicker in the window, even though there was no house left to hold it. That if you stood in the field long enough, you'd hear the faint sound of a woman humming, a lullaby that made no sense but chilled the air around you. But history has a way of circling back to those who disturb it. In 1962, a team of surveyors came to inspect the property for a new road project. One of them, a young man named Daniel Reeves, found something buried in the soil near the old well. A small box rusted shut. Inside was a handful of letters, wrapped in cloth gone yellow with age. They were written in a careful hand, signed, Clara Mee Harlan. The letters were never meant to be read. They were confessions, fragments of a woman's mind crumbling under the weight of something unspeakable. In them, she wrote of her father's visions, how he claimed angels visited him in the night, whispering that the bloodline was chosen. How he said she was not his child, but his divine reflection. Each letter trembled between love and terror, as if she was pleading with herself to believe him, even as her soul rejected it. The last letter was dated October 12, 1914. In it she spoke of a child, a boy who no longer called her mother, but something else. He looks through me, she wrote, as if I am a window, and something behind me is calling his name. She ended the letter with a single line that no historian has ever been able to explain. When the earth opens, he will go home. After those letters were found, the construction project was halted. The county archives logged them briefly, then the documents disappeared, sealed or perhaps destroyed. But one of the surveyors, Daniel, took photographs before the evidence vanished. Years later, in an interview no one ever aired, he said he'd return to the site once more, just before dawn. He claimed the soil around the old well had shifted, as if breathing. If you're still watching. The narrator would whisper, voice low and steady, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? In 1978, a historian from Auburn University named Dr. Elaine Porter began researching unsolved disappearances in Pike County. Her focus was on missing persons from the early 20th century, mostly women and children whose names had been lost to incomplete records. In a stack of brittle courthouse files she found something that shouldn't have existed, a receipt for 3 unmarked coffins dated 2 days after Samuel Harlan's death, paid for in cash by a man listed only as T. H. She didn't know what that meant until she saw the signature. The handwriting was identical to that found on a school roster from 1927 belonging to one Thomas Harlan, the boy who was never supposed to grow up. Dr. Porter drove to the site herself. By then it was nothing but a field thick with weeds and vines that seemed to choke the earth. She took soil samples, measurements, photographs, but her notes grew stranger with each page. She wrote of hearing a rhythmic sound beneath her feet, like something knocking from below. She wrote that her compass spun in circles, her camera jammed, her breath came short. The last line of her field journal simply read, "It's not empty." Weeks later she vanished. Her car was found at the edge of the property, door open, engine cold. Her camera was missing, but her notebook remained on the seat. Inside was a single undeveloped roll of film. When processed, the images were faint shadows, distortions, but in one frame, taken near the old well, there appeared the outline of 2 figures, a man and a child. Their faces blurred, but their posture unmistakable. The child's hand reached toward the camera. The sheriff's report ruled her disappearance undetermined. No follow-up, no search party. Her family pushed for answers, but the case was quietly closed within months. Those who have studied her work say she'd found something the county didn't want unearthed, something that would have rewritten the quiet myth of Pike County into a record of generational sin. And perhaps the most unsettling part years later, when her brother claimed her personal belongings from storage, he found one more note tucked inside the cover of her Bible. It was in her handwriting, though shaky and rushed, as if written in fear. It read, "He is still here, and he knows his name again." By the 1990s, the Harlan story had become folklore again, whisted, retold, nearly forgotten. Locals warned teenagers not to drive out to the old property after dark. They said the soil was cursed, that the trees leaned away from the house's foundation, because even they didn't want their roots touching what lay beneath. Ghost hunters came and went, leaving with shaky camera footage and excuses about technical glitches. But one man, an independent filmmaker named Robert Lang, wasn't there for ghosts. He was looking for truth. Lang had grown up just 2 counties over. His grandmother used to tell him stories about the man who married his blood. She claimed her own father had worked those fields once, and swore he'd seen a woman's face staring out of a second-floor window long after the house had fallen in. Lang thought it was superstition, the kind of small, town horror meant to keep kids in bed at night. Until he found Dr. Porter's missing photographs online, mislabeled in a digital archive under rural architecture. He spent 3 months piecing together what he could, property records, tax filings, family Bibles. And then he found something buried deeper, a birth certificate dated 1919, Father Samuel Harlan, Mother, Child Thomas, but beneath that, in faint pencil, almost erased, was a second entry, 1938, Pike County Hospital, stillborn male, mother deceased, no names. Only an address, Harlan Road. Lang released his documentary in 1997, a small independent film called Blood of the Pines. It aired once on public television, late at night, and was never broadcast again. Viewers who saw it described it as more curse than film. Grainy images of the property, distorted voices layered under the soundtrack, a closing shot of the well that seemed to echo even through the speakers. The station claimed the master tape was damaged and destroyed it, but fragments resurfaced years later online, traded like contraband. In one clip, a voice, Lang's voice, whispers from behind the camera, "Something's moving down there." Robert Lang disappeared a week after the film aired. His car was found near the Harlan property, door open, camera missing. The last frame recovered from his film reel shows a single candle burning in the darkness, reflected in what looks like a pair of eyes. And beneath it, faint but audible, a woman's voice saying, "Thomas." In 2008, 100 years after the wedding that cursed a family and a county, the Harlan property was finally purchased by the state. They planned to turn it into a heritage site, an attempt to sanitize what had once been unspeakable. The bulldozers came first, and for a while it seemed as if history would finally be buried for good. But when the excavation began, the machines hit something solid beneath the soil. It wasn't stone, it wasn't wood, it was a foundation far older than 1908. Beneath the Harlan house lay the remains of another structure, burned, collapsed, and covered over long before Samuel's time. Inside it, archaeologists found fragments of charred beams, pieces of iron tools and bones, dozens of them, men, women, children. No official record of who they were or how they died. The site was quickly closed, the findings sealed by the county. But one worker, who later broke his silence online, said the bones were arranged in circles, deliberate, ceremonial, and in the center of the largest ring they found a small wooden box. Inside that box was a photograph. Faded water, damaged but clear enough to make out two faces. Samuel and Clara Mee standing in front of the house on their wedding day. Only something was wrong. Behind them, faint in the background, was a third figure, a man, tall, featureless, standing in the shadow of the trees. The photo predates the invention of double exposure in that region. Experts called it a defect. Others weren't so sure. That same year, the county museum received an anonymous package. Inside was a reel of undeveloped film labeled simply T.H. When processed, the images showed scenes from inside the house, though no house had stood for decades. One image showed a dining table, set for two, another, a child's crib. In the final frame, there was the same wooden box found in the soil, but opened. Empty, the state project was abandoned. The site was fenced off and marked private property, with no public explanation. To this day, no one knows who sent the reel or how the photos could exist at all. But locals still say that on summer nights, when the air is thick and the crickets fall silent, you can hear someone calling a name from beneath the ground. Not a scream, not a moan, just a slow, patient voice repeating one word over and over. Clara, and when the wind changes direction, sometimes it answers back, "Thomas."